Now let's see how the organic composition of capital is affecting the individual sectors, basically. Um, so let's calculate organic composition for individual sectors. Basically, for that we need to divide C to V. We can also calculate it for the whole economy, for which we need to do it for the whole economy, basically. So this is it, basically. Organic composition of capital can at most be zero. You always need workers, variable capital, by the way. Well, C or V. So at very hypothetical case where you don't have a V, you might have a infinite amount. The organic composition will be infinite, basically. And at a hypothetical case where you don't have C, basically it will be zero. So the value will be somewhere between zero and infinite, basically. And the higher organic composition is, the higher will be C relative to V. As you expect, the sector with relatively more C has a higher organic composition, 1.5. The sector with relatively more V has a lower organic composition, 0.67. And we have a sector which has exactly the same organic composition of capital as the economy itself. So, in the sector where the organic composition is same as the economy, the profit and surplus value are exactly equal to each other. Exchange value and price are also equal to each other. That sector is a sector that mimics the economic system, overall economic system. If you have a sector with relatively less, relatively more or less organic composition, basically, or more variable capital relative to other sectors on average, per capital used in that sector, well, that sector will produce more surplus value. However, since basically, without capital mobility, that would mean the profit rate in that sector will be higher. But since this will attract more capital, this will basically increase amount of investments in these sectors, which will decrease the price below the exchange value. As a result, the profit in that sector will also be smaller. So profit in this sector will be smaller than the surplus value extracted in this sector, and the price in this sector will be less than exchange value in this sector. So part of the surplus value produced in this sector will basically flow to other sectors. Well, the third sector is a sector with relatively high organic composition of capital, which means actually constant capital, non-labor inputs are relatively higher per capital use in this sector. This is the capital-intensive sector, basically. The previous one was labor-intensive sector, basically. Farming could be an example, and this is for example, high-tech sectors are example of it. Well, since you have less variable capital in these sectors, the surplus value will be smaller, which will mean the profit in these sectors will be smaller than the economy-wide average. So capital will flow out of these sectors. Since less investments will be done in these sectors, the prices will rise above the exchange value. As a result, the profit earned in this sector will be also higher than the surplus value. If price rise, also the companies in the sector will win something from the increase in prices, basically. As a result, I mean, part of the surplus value that is produced in other sectors will flow in this sector. So sectors with particularly low or high organic composition of capital are not experiencing the harm of it, basically. In the end, whether you have a relatively more variable capital or less variable capital, your profit rate and profit amount will be the same. Profit will be distributed equally well, to be exact, profit per capital will be distributed equally, assuming there is capital mobility, full capital mobility between the sectors. In coming parts, we will also see whether that assumption might be relaxed, basically, this capital mobility assumption. So, what about for the whole economy? Well, here we will make a small modification. Just think about this. Let's say we divide here everything to V. So at the top we will have S over V. At the bottom, their sizes are large. At the bottom you will have you have two parentheses, V over V plus C over V. Again, these are large. These two terms are equal to each other. V over V is basically 1, so this is 1. So you have an interesting formula. You have profit rate equal to, at the top you have exploitation rate, at the bottom you have 1 plus the organic composition of capital. So we have basically expressed the profit rate in terms of the surplus, exploitation rate and the organic composition of capital. So these two variables can together explain the profit rate. So what do these two variables mean for the profit rate? First, we thought that the labor is the only source of profit and exploitation is the only source of profit. But now we have a second term. What does the second term mean? At first, we might ask this. Well, at first, you should note that S over V exploitation rate is showing us the highest possible profit rate. Note that the C over V cannot take any value less than 0. At most it can be 0, and that's the case when you have 0 constant capital. So when you have no constant capital, then this is 0, this will be 1, and profit rate will be equal to the exploitation rate. But if you have any C, any constant capital in the economic system, in that case, the C over V will be positive, and basically at the bottom you will have a term larger than 1, and that will decrease profit rate below the exploitation rate. So exploitation rate is kind of the highest possible profit rate, and organic composition of capital creates a dead weight in the economic system, which is taking the profit rate below its maximum potential. So here it becomes important to ask what creates C, basically, and what is the function of C? Is it if it is harmful, if it reduces profit rate, why do companies choose methods when they have more C? All of these questions will be answered in the coming parts, and they are really important questions. But here, the one thing you should concentrate on is again C over V. The higher organic composition you have in the economic system, the lower will be economy-wide profit rate. In individual sectors, it is not important. It does not decrease the sector-wide profit rate when you have a higher C in the sector. But when you have more C in the whole economic system, that will reduce the profit rate, basically. So when C over V in an economy is high, it drives profit rate in the economy down. But when C over V in a sector is relatively high, this doesn't decrease profit rate within this sector relative to other sectors. Well, there is much more to discuss, and we will discuss that in the coming lectures. But now, this is the basic framework, and at least the basic framework should be, in my opinion, clear now. Now we will see Böhm-Bawerk's. But there's one thing more. One thing on price deviation. You should note that also. Price deviation in each sector. I mean, that's the way this price and exchange value is different, basically. It depends on two different things. At first, for each individual sector, it depends on organic composition of capital. The closer organic composition of capital is to the economy-wide organic composition, the less will be the price deviation. If this becomes, for example, 90 and this becomes 110, price deviation will be should be smaller. Why it is not smaller? I have made a mistake here probably. And this is bound. Well, of course, the surplus value will be same as will be reduced in that case, and in that case, as you see, the price deviation will be smaller. Previously, it was 320 and 200 and 300 was 20. Now it is around 14 basically. You might play with the numbers basically, but be careful. I mean, sometimes when you change a variable, you should change everything else with it. The second way, basically, the second thing that affects the overall price deviation is the relative the exploitation rate in the economic system. If exploitation rate was lower, in that case, basically, the total extra value that is added and redistributed as profits will be smaller. For example, I have increased the wage by 20%, for example, let's assume. So in that case, comma, point, and this should be equal. Let's say I have done the same thing also here. And here. So, well, that means the exploitation rate, the surplus value will be less, since the total value created will be still the same in that case. So this will be minus 24.96, and this will be minus 16, which will be 64, I believe. As you see, the price deviations have become smaller in this case compared with the exchange value. They are not anymore 300. For example, here, previously the price deviation was 20, now it is 15, basically. Why? Because the total, well, C and V exist both in exchange value and the price. The thing that deviates is the surplus value. So if relatively I am left with less surplus value because my exploitation rate is, let's say, smaller, in that case, basically, the moment. So my exploitation rate in this case 66% S over V in each case. In that case, basically, my deviation from prices, even in the sectors with low or high organic composition, in both of them, will be smaller. So now we can start to the Böhm-Bawerk's critique.